What is a comic? Seems like a simple enough question. We all know what comic books are. We read them when we were kids. I want to suggest this question, what is a comic, has some subtlety to it. That in fact, the question, what is a comic, asks after, what is literature? What is art? More than that, what is the relationship between literature and art and time? Because time seems unidirectional, always moving in the future, always moving like the tick of a clock or the page of a calendar forward. Literature moves with it, moves through different editions. And by reading those editions, we can move into the past. So that makes us ask, which edition is the authoritative edition? To explore this question, I want to look at one of my favorite comic books, Batman Hush. And I have here 4 versions of Batman Hush. The first came out in 2002, and it came out as these 12 separate comic books. We call these in the business floppies. And we call them that. I'm going to put them down here. We'll get to them. We call them that because they are indeed quite floppy. This is issue 608 of the ongoing serial Batman. And this edition began the story Batman Hush with great fanfare. Batman swinging in on a rope, and he's almost kicking us in the face, but he's leading our eye up here. It begins here. And then we see Jeff Loeb, who wrote the series, Jim Lee, who drew it, and Scott Williams, who inked it. So Batman Hush is kicking into our lives here, an exciting issue. And we open it up, and the first thing we see maybe is the first panel, but oh, there's an ad here, an ad for a video game. And as we move through the story, we see that the ads are everywhere. Let the mooching begin, Starburst. Then we go on. Oh, there's mercenaries. It keeps going. One of the qualities of floppies is that they're ongoing, they're serialized, and they contain ads. They're kind of disposable in that regard. They're a little bit floppy. You can read them to bits, and they're selling themselves and they're selling other things. Here's the floppy of Batman Hush. And again, it came out in 12 separate issues, each one with an exciting cover. Punchline, there's the Joker. We'll deal with that one in a bit. So, at the end of the series, there was a little pause, and then Batman Hush came out in 2 trade paperbacks. These are called trade paperbacks, and they're a little more substantial than the comic books. These came out in 2003, and you can see they are nicely bound with the author, the illustrator, and the inker, like a novel on the sides. And these are more like graphic novels. They contain the stories. They contain a little prefatory material. They contain a lot of information. And they don't contain the ads. They're more substantial. They separate the story from the series, and they tell us these are freestanding. So these are the trade paperbacks. They came out after the floppies, or the pamphlets, and they're more solid. They're more like books than they are like disposable advertising serial items. But there's more. If we go down here, in 2005, after the trade paperbacks came out, we have Batman Hush, the Absolute Edition. And this is a kind of collector's edition, and there's a wonderful drawing by Jim Lee of the Batman. You open it up, oh, the size is big. You can see there's an interview right away between the writer and the artist and DC Comics. And then you get a little origin story of Batman, which didn't come in the comics. It's a little extra. And then the cover of that first issue is transformed into this almost poster-size illustration for you to appreciate. Oh, no more video games. Instead, we get the cover nicely reproduced again, and then we get the story kind of cleaned up, made bigger and more beautiful than before. So these are 3 separate published versions. They came out at different times, and they materialize the story of Batman Hush differently. Let's set that aside. I have here an actual page drawn by Jim Lee and inked by Scott Williams. And it's a page from issue 614 of Batman. And it is the actual page that these men drew. And you can see here, it's not colored, and you can see, it gives us an overview of an action scene. And down here, Thomas Elliot appears to have been shot, apparently by the Joker. And we see here the ruins in the alley of this fight, the aftermath of the fight. And Harley Quinn, the Joker's ally and would-be girlfriend, is knocked out. Catwoman, who's actually on Batman's side in this adventure, is also knocked out. And there's Jim Gordon and Batman staring at the Joker. And the wonder of the scene is that we're kind of pulled back looking at the whole thing. And then, if you look here, Lee and Williams have simply copied over this panel. They've reproduced it over here. And the only change is they've drawn in Hush, the villain of the series. And he's peeking in over the alley. So you can see that merely a second has gone by. This gutter that separates the two panels, merely a second has gone by. And in that second, nothing has changed in the alley, but Hush has peered over. And then we sweep down here. We sweep down to a third panel. The gutter is almost a little bigger to indicate that time that it's taken us as the reader to reorient ourselves. And we're looking up, almost from the alley, but not quite that low. We're looking up at Hush, and this is our first view of this enemy of Batman's. So the page is an interesting composition. It hits at the notion of time in comics. It also hits at the way comics pages are both beautiful artworks, but they also contain reproductions within themselves. But if we look a little closer at the page, we can begin to pick out details. Not just the details of the various participants in the fight, but if you look at the walls, Lee has written in interesting graffiti. I see the name here, Kane. Well, Bob Kane is the so-called creator of Batman. And just above that is Sprang. Dick Sprang was one of the early illustrators of Batman, and he was actually hired to produce a backlog of stories for Kane in case Kane was drafted into the army. Above that is Robinson. Jerry Robinson was a young kid discovered by Bob Kane at about the age of 17 and became one of Kane's inkers. Just like Scott Williams inked this page, Jerry Robinson inked pages for Kane, but he also, he gave a lot to the Batman story. We could call him a co-creator. In fact, it's arguable that he came up with the Joker. Above that is Moldorf. Sheldon Moldorf was an inker before Robinson, and went on to ink many and ghost illustrate many Batman stories. So the wall here is kind of a library or a pantheon of great Batman artists. And if we look over here, well, we see Williams. That could be Scott Williams, the very inker of this page. Jerry Bingham, Batman artist. Scott McDaniel, another one. Don Newton. I think he drew the second Robin, Jason Todd. Over here, Sale. Tim Sale is an artist who's worked a lot with Jeff Loeb. Did The Long Halloween with Jeff Loeb. So this illustration, it doesn't just contain Batman heroes and villains. It's also a statement about the art itself, about the artists over time who contributed to Batman. It's thick with detail and with the history of Batman in both its story and in the story it tells on the walls. So this page is in many ways about time. It's about the reader's time, it's about the time of the narrative, and it's about the artists who've engaged in Batman. But the timing of the story also works differently according to how this picture is portrayed. So here, we're just looking at a static picture. But if we go back to the floppy, and here it is again, punchline, and there's Joker being choked by Batman. And I marked the page here. So this is the page before, and we see Batman was about to choke Joker to death, but Gordon, he came and he had to threaten Batman, but he did. He stopped Batman from doing something awful, breaking his code not to kill people. Batman's got blood on his hands, literally and almost figuratively. Gordon reflects, and there's a nice moment here where Gordon puts his hand on Batman's shoulder, and then the Joker, always getting the last laugh, "I'm innocent!" We turn the page, and there's the overview. So There's a nice long shot, horizontal shot of intimacy, and then we're drawn back to survey the scene. It's a wonderful reveal. But look how you turn the page here. Something else is going on. You're taking in this, you're looking here, and then you turn the page. Correct me if I'm wrong, but in that turn of the page, what you first see is Hush's eyes. Maybe his hand, but really his face. Woomph. Then you reorient yourself. So this is an interesting point about comics. The narrative would move one way, from here to here. But in fact, the reader's experience moves a different way, from here to here, then to here. So the reader makes a twist and a turn. The reader goes ahead and then comes back and then takes over the scene. So the floppy puts the art in a certain relationship to the narrative. Let's look here at the graphic novel, the trade paperback, which I'm calling a graphic novel because it contains the story and really only the story. Here it's different. Here we see, I'm innocent. And then we turn here, we take a breath. Close, we're reading that, then we back away. Look what happened. Then we turn to Hush, and then we turn the page. Maybe we see, oh, the story's almost over, but then we look and we study him. The difference is that the material production of each text changes the reader's relationship to the narrative. So my question is, which is the real Hush? Which did Jeff Loeb and Jim Lee intend? We can be pretty sure that Jim Lee and Jeff Loeb and Scott Williams all intended the page to look like this. But what I'm trying to get at is the narrative pacing changes with each material version, and those versions, those narrative versions, are different depending on the format of your reading. Your experience of the story of Batman changes with each material version. So why does this matter? What's the larger issue here? Well, I will ask again, what is a comic? We see a comic has different formats, but the larger question is, where is Batman? Where is Batman Hush? Which is the correct pacing of the story? Which is the actual version that we should believe is true? This may seem trivial, but I suggest it's not. Because if we expand the issue, we ask, where is Shakespeare? Where is Hamlet? Maybe arguably Shakespeare's greatest work. Where is Hamlet? Well, one would say Hamlet is in the book, Hamlet. But Hamlet was published a number of times, and each time is different. For example, Hamlet first came out in 1603 in what is effectively a floppy. We call those quartos. And the first quarto of Hamlet was a cheap, floppy publication, probably sold unbound, maybe stitched down the middle in what we call saddle binding. And these comics over here, they're bound in what we call saddle binding. And we call it saddle binding because it sits like a saddle of a horse. That's where the staples go through. So the first Hamlet came out in this cheap floppy, sold cheaply, punched through, sewn up, and it's short. It's half the length of what we now think of as Hamlet. And maybe it was a recording, someone's mnemonic recording from experiencing the play on stage. Maybe it was a cheap, short version that the company, Shakespeare included, decided to put out, see if they could drum up some sales. In any case, a few years later, 1604, 05, a second quarto comes out. This one takes the first quarto and corrects it against a manuscript and makes it a much longer play. That version is reprinted again and again. Now remember, we have nothing in Shakespeare's original handwriting, maybe a couple lines of a play called about Thomas More, but we have no specific version of Shakespeare's Hamlet, and we have these two quarto versions. Now this longer version, call it quarto B, was reprinted a number of times, and those too got changed. They got corrected, the typography was reset in some instances. Now in 1623, the major edition, dare we say, the collector's edition, the absolute edition of Shakespeare, which we call the First Folio, came out, and it collects 36 of his plays, and it claims that they're newly corrected, that these are not the deformed earlier editions. And it basically follows that second quarter, but with many differences. We have to say it's a third version of Hamlet. It changes that second version. And the story gets even more complicated because it seems to have used one of the reprints of that second version and then maybe some other text and changed that again. So where is Hamlet? We have 3 versions of Hamlet. Scholars tend to try and make a new version, a best version, which combines the 2 longer versions into one best Shakespeare. But if we're thinking historically, we're not going to accept that because we're going to say that's a tampered edition, it's a modern edition, a modern version. So in the end, we're left with the question, where is Shakespeare? Where is Hamlet? Where is Batman? Where is Batman Hush? And I'm going to suggest, really, there is no finite answer. Each version is located in a moment in time. And as we read, we're alert to those separate moments in time. And we can go back. We can say, I want to read this version, the floppy version of Hamlet, because I want to know what the first readers of Hamlet experienced. Or we can fast forward in time a little bit, and we can say, I want to know what Hamlet is now. I want to read the most up-to-date scholarly edition of Hamlet. So we can read the floppies of Batman and say, I want to enjoy the story as it came out. Or we can say, I want to see the most gorgeous version and read the absolute edition. But in each case, we need to be alert with the fact that we are struggling with time. We are struggling with the material embodiment of literature as it moves across time. And that struggle is ultimately a struggle in which we're struggling with our own time. We're leaving our own time and moving into different moments of the past and investigating them. That is the power of literature, to move us through time.